Hi everybody, I'm Scott Kamshafer and I'm a clinical therapist and social worker here in Austin, Texas, and this month's video blog is on consent. And a lot has been made in recent days and weeks, especially in the media, of this issue of consent. Um, there have been numerous political figures and celebrities who have been basically gotten in trouble because they have been involved in uh, sexual advances and experiences with others that did not involve what we call consent, or they've been basically caught in behaviors that involved non-consent. And consent is, at least in my mind, is the main thing that separates consensual sexual behavior, or sexual behavior that is basically mutually agreed on, and sexual violence, which some people wouldn't discriminate sexual violence from basic violence, and I don't really see a whole lot of differences between those two. But mainly the thing is that unless somebody has told you in one way, shape, or form that they are okay with having sexual engagement and involvement with you, you are dealing with a situation of non-consent. And that throws things from being, like I called them, consensual sexual involvement to non-consent or violence. And one of the main areas I focus on with my clients is promoting what I consider to be a definition of sexual health that has been that I've been taught about, that one of the main principles of sexual health is consent. And if you don't have it, then you don't have sexual health. So one of the things that I really encourage you all to focus on is being clear about what consent looks like as far as you giving it, and understanding if someone else is giving it to you. Now, there happens to be a very handy video on YouTube for understanding this concept and this sexual health principle of consent. And it's called, and I'll flash the name on the screen for you. It's called Consent, or T-Consent. And if you look at this or watch this video on YouTube, it gives you a very clear definition of what consent looks like as far as when it's being given, and how to figure out whether that's something that is actually going on in any given situation you may become involved sexually with someone in. So, and there are a number of other sexual health principles that are very important too. But I think one of the things that has gotten so many people in trouble recently, especially in the media and in the political life and in public life, is that these individuals have not gotten consent. And in some situations, there's no way that consent can be given, especially if someone is underage. They can't give their consent because they don't have legal capacity to give it. In other cases, it needs to be more fleshed out and hashed out than a lot of folks who've gotten caught up in non-consensual involvement with others have done. So I encourage everybody to get clear on the concept of what consent looks like as far as them giving it, and how they are to correctly interpret it from somebody else. Because unless and until somebody says yes, you don't have consent. And that throws a situation from being one where people are acting in their right mind, and can give their I don't know any other way to define it. It's okay in most situations, I don't want to say all, if you have consent from someone. Sometimes people can get consent, and they get consent, and they get consent, and they get consent, but they do it so many times and with so many different people that for them it feels like it's out of control. I'm a be able to get consent from any number of sexual partners and have sexual involvement with people, but to the extent that I'm doing it, it may feel like it's out of control and it's out of line, and maybe I'm being disloyal to a committed relationship that I'm in. And that's where we would say, even though you have consent, you don't necessarily have sexual health, because you're not honoring your agreements to a spouse or to another significant other that you have a monogamous relationship with. But maybe people don't have a monogamous relationship. Maybe they're in a number of different relationships with a number of different people, but they still have consent. That can't necessarily be construed to not be sexual health. But what I'm saying is, sometimes people have consent, but it still doesn't feel right to them. And it may not feel right to one or more of their partners, and that's where we have issues. But at least they've found a way to make sure that they've gotten consent from the people they can be involved with, and they know how to give consent in unambiguous terms. So I encourage any of you all, if you have issues with consent as far as your sexual involvement, you need to get help with that, to figure out where you're going wrong as far as either getting it, giving it, making sure that you're even having the conversation, because there's just so much dysfunction and lack of health in this country, in America, as far as sexuality goes. And if you feel like you have issues with figuring out how to get consent and how to give it, I encourage you to give me a call. And if for some reason I can't help you with that, I can at least guide you to someone who can. Because there's no reason for you or anybody you love to suffer in silence because they're really stuck on this issue of consent. It really doesn't need to be as difficult as it is for people to either give or get it. And again, that T-consent video that I suggested earlier, that's a really good starting place, and that may be as far as you need to go in figuring out, how do I know whether I've gotten consent, and how do I give consent to another individual? But in any case, I appreciate you watching, and I wish you all to have the most sexual health possible, and thank you again for watching. Take care, and goodbye.